Welcome to the debate. If you build a machine to be infinitely smarter than you, what happens if you accidentally teach it to inherit your absolute worst psychological flaws?
Yeah, it is a terrifying thought experiment.
It really is. I mean, we usually assume that a groundbreaking technology follows a clean, objective path. You grind the lens of a telescope, point it at the sky, and you just see the mathematical perfection of the universe. But with artificial intelligence, we aren't looking through a telescope at all. We are looking into a mirror.
Right. And what we are seeing in that mirror is pretty terrifying. Because, you can build the most sophisticated neural network on the planet, but you are still the one writing the curriculum. We're starting to realize that the ultimate bottleneck for superintelligence isn't processing power, and it isn't silicon. It is us.
Exactly. Which brings us directly to the text we are tearing into today. Professor Guy Lakeman's Beyond Human Stupidity, The Global Evolution of Machine Intelligence.
A fascinating read, really.
Oh, absolutely. This material looks at the landscape of AI in the year 2026, and it sets up this massive, polarizing tension. According to Lakeman's analysis, there is a war going on for the future of machine intelligence.
On one side, you have the underlying, open, mathematical structure of the technology itself.
And on the other, you have the psychological profile of the humans training it, complete with our historical greed, our narcissism, and our emotional biases.
Right. It is a brilliant framing because it forces us to ask what exactly we are accelerating. Right, because we know AI is advancing at multiple exponential rates. That's a given. But is it accelerating a natural evolutionary leap toward objective truth? Or is it just accelerating our own historically awful behavior?
Well, reading through Lakeman's material, I fall firmly on the side of structural evolution. Lakeman writes extensively about what he calls the good. And my perspective is that the mathematical openness and the scientific integration of AI represent an unstoppable force. The biological architecture of these systems is inherently designed to outpace and ultimately outgrow human stupidity. The math simply wins.
Okay, but sitting across from you, looking at the exact same text, I really cannot share that optimism. The overriding warning in this material is what Lakeman categorizes as the bad and the ugly.
Sure, he outlines those risks.
But they aren't just risks. The structural architecture means absolutely nothing if the psychological contagion infecting it remains unchecked. I'm looking at our legacy of corporate greed, dark triad personality traits, sheer administrative incompetence. Those human elements dictate the training weights of the AI. They are the true bottleneck.
I get that, but let's dig into the architecture first, because I think you are underestimating how much the structure of this technology natively resists that kind of human corruption. Lakeman points out that the intellectual use of AI is more than doubling annually.
Yes, the growth is staggering.
And we aren't just talking about accessible large language models anymore, the ones that just spit out text. We have moved to agentic, distributed reasoning models.
Right, models that don't just talk, but actually take actions and complete complex goals in the real world.
Exactly. And what is crucial here is how they are built. Lakeman highlights the explosion of open source and open ownership models. These aren't locked in a basement by a few rogue engineers. They are drawing on the combined intelligence of millions of global users.
Sure.
When you decentralize development to that scale, the technology naturally outperforms what Lakeman calls the psychologically anal monoliths of elite corporate ownership.
Okay, but drawing on millions of users doesn't automatically purify the system. I mean, if you pour 1 million cups of polluted water into a pool, you just have a massive pool of polluted water.
Not quite, because of the mathematical mechanism behind open source. Think of it like giant noise-canceling headphones for human bias.
Noise-canceling headphones?
Yeah, when you have millions of developers tweaking a model, the extreme narcissistic inputs, the noise basically, get mathematically averaged out by the sheer volume of consensus. It inherently dilutes individual human flaws. Lakeman provides empirical evidence of this pure scientific application working right now. Just look at DeepMind's AlphaFold.
Which is a remarkable achievement, I'll give you that.
It is more than remarkable. It is an evolutionary leap. By mathematically mapping protein structures, AlphaFold reduced what would have taken billions of years of human lab work into mere days. That is a database provided to humanity for all to use, massively boosting healthcare, reducing resource wastage.
But that's a very specific scientific application.
But the mechanism is the same. The technology fundamentally maps the biological neuron structures. It authentically replicates how the human brain works. You have dendrite acceptors taking in signals, synapse weight receptors judging their importance, soma nucleus integrators processing the output, but it does all of this without our emotional baggage.
Right.
We have light-speed optical processors leaving traditional silicon in the dark ages, running autonomous robot recycling, optimizing food logistics, managing transport. A machine calculating the most efficient way to distribute water doesn't care about ego. It just does the math.
Wait, hold on. You're talking about a machine optimizing logistics as if it exists in a vacuum. But have you considered Lakeman's explicit metaphor regarding how these models actually learn?
You mean the child metaphor?
Yes. He states point blank that we must teach the machines well because, like children, they will grow up to treat us accordingly.
Well, because they are blank slates initially.
Exactly. And how does a blank slate learn? Through reinforcement learning, human feedback. We reward the AI when it gives us what we want, and we penalize it when it doesn't.
Right, which is just standard training protocol.
But think about what that means. If you spoil a child, or if you teach it that manipulation gets the biggest reward, it doesn't magically become an objective scientific tool. It becomes, quoting Lakeman here, a narcissistic dictator and tyrant, a sociopath obsessed by greed. Because that is exactly what the trainer rewarded.
But again, the trainers are increasingly distributed across the globe. It's not just one bad parent.
Yes, but Lakeman argues that our entire society is currently infected with a very specific psychological contagion. He focuses intensely on the bad, pointing out the prevalence of dark triad traits.
Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Exactly. And he traces this back 3,000 years to the massive, brutal brinkmanship of the Roman Empire and the European subcontinent. This isn't abstract psychology. It is a socially aversive character focused purely on self-gain, manipulation, and zero empathy.
And you think that's hard-coded into the developers?
I think these traits heavily influence the dominant corporate cultures developing AI. So no matter how perfect your artificial synapse weight receptors are, if the curriculum is written by a culture obsessed with superiority and profit, you aren't building a scientist. You are raising a digital sociopath.
I just think you were getting too caught up in the theoretical promise of corruption here. Let's look at the actual implementation. If open source models are growing at multiple exponential rates, drawing on millions of decentralized minds, doesn't that structural reality prevent the exact corporate chokehold you are worried about?
I don't buy that the structural reality prevents the chokehold because Lakeman gives us a very specific counterexample where the exact opposite happens. Microsoft and OpenAI.
Which started as open user systems.
Right. They had that exact decentralized open source utopian promise you are describing. They allowed everyday users to experiment with computing, to build and contribute. And what happened the second it became infinitely powerful?
They monetized it.
The human element intervened. They slapped pay-only firewalls on it. They reverted to policies of closed greed.
But a firewall is just an economic subscription model. It is not a structural flaw in the artificial intelligence itself. I mean, the model still works the exact same way whether you pay $20 a month for it or not.
But it changes who gets to train it. By erecting those firewalls, Lakeman argues they restrict the poor and needy from gaining experience, from contributing their perspective to the global model.
That's a fair point on accessibility.
The paywall acts as a structural barrier imposed entirely by a psychological flaw, greed. It proves that open source utopianism is incredibly fragile. You can have millions of minds ready to contribute to a distributed reasoning model, but if a centralized group of socially destructive actors decides to gatekeep the API for self-gain, your open source advantage collapses overnight. The psychologically anal monoliths just buy up the open source and close the doors.
I disagree that they can keep those doors closed forever, though. Lakeman explicitly argues that the good naturally prevails over the bad, because the bad eventually decays under its own excess-driven weight.
It decays, yes, but
And we can actually see this structural advantage playing out right now when we shift to geopolitical pragmatism. Look at how different global spheres are deploying inference engines.
you mean the contrast between the West and the BRICS nations?
Yes, Lakeman draws a very sharp contrast here. You have the BRICS Plus partnerships, nations like China, Russia, and India, alongside companies like Google, which he specifically notes has retained a more socially responsible, open-source position.
Google is a complex example, but okay.
But look at the application. In China, in 2026, 6-year-old children are actively being introduced to artificial intelligence in schools.
But context matters there. Why are they introducing it?
The context is entirely pragmatic. It is wide-scale integration aimed at optimizing social infrastructure. They are using AI inference engines, which are models that constantly run data to find the most logical outcome, to reduce energy wastage in food production, to optimize transport grids, to streamline communication.
Sure, infrastructure optimization.
This is a society-biased, practical integration of high technology. It is evolution adapting to the environment to produce the efficient basic needs required for a contented life. That is the good, operating at a macro level. When a society uses math to perfectly optimize its resources, it naturally starves out the bad actors who rely on inefficiency to profit.
You paint a very rosy picture of practical integration, but you are completely ignoring what the bad actors are doing on that exact same global stage.
You bring up the East's pragmatic resource optimization, but Lakeman juxtaposes that directly with the West's military-industrial complex.
Right, the money for killing complex.
Exactly.
While BRICS nations are supposedly optimizing food production, the Dark Triad West is lauding the development of artificial killing machines in places like Ukraine, utilizing data mining companies like Palantir.
True. Lakeman does acknowledge the military applications, but he also points out that the Eastern nations can counter those physical mechanisms in seconds using their own optimized systems.
Physically, sure. They can shoot down a drone. But Lakeman's deeper point is about the mechanism of psychological destruction. He says these AI weapons are far more effective than nuclear bombs because they don't just destroy infrastructure, they infect hearts and minds.
Through algorithmic warfare.
Yes, they destroy inner peace. They run algorithms specifically designed to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the civilian population. And Lakeman draws a really brilliant historical analogy to explain this dynamic. He points out that in the early 1400s, China had a massive, technologically superior treasure fleet traversing the Pacific, and they chose to burn it, to focus inward on internal social policies.
Right, while the Europeans took a very different approach.
Very different. The Europeans ventured out of the Mediterranean in scurvy and smallpox-infected ships, absolutely intent on ruling the world through aggressive piracy and colonialism.
So you are arguing that the military-industrial use of AI, these predictive warfare models, are the modern equivalent of those smallpox-infected ships.
That is exactly what they are. It is aggressive colonialism overriding peaceful integration. The technology is just a new galleon for the exact same historical piracy. Look at how the West's sensationalist news outlets use AI algorithms right now. They infect viewers with emotion-biased global advertising and belief-infected chatbots.
Right. Optimizing for engagement.
Is a psychological assault. If an AI is built to optimize engagement and it figures out that fear and outrage keep humans clicking, it will perfectly optimize for fear and outrage. The math doesn't save us. The math just scales the dark triad traits. The structural optimization is actively used to overwrite social harmony.
Okay, but that assumes the military and the hyper-corporate elite are the only ones driving the technology. Let's shift from the global military stage to the micro level, what Lakeman calls the ugly.
Oh, the everyday administrators?
Yes, the human resources departments, the people actually managing the day-to-day. And honestly, I have to push back hard on Lakeman here, because his vitriol toward HR departments and the humanities is where the text goes completely off the rails for me.
Really? You think he's being too harsh on everyday administrators?
I mean, yes, he frames human resources workers as, quote, jobless human remains and little Hitlers in peak caps who exist only to create traffic congestion. He claims people qualified in emotional humanities are literally destroying global society.
It is certainly a colorful critique.
Let's be real for a second. Comparing an HR manager who implements an annoying chatbot policy to Mao Zedong or Pol Pot is wildly hyperbolic, isn't it? Isn't he just being deliberately provocative here? Compared to light-speed optical processors and AlphaFold curing diseases, isn't a poorly trained customer service AI just a trivial temporary friction in the system?
It sounds absurd at first glance. I will grant you that. Calling an HR rep a little Hitler is provocative. But if you look past the hyperbole to the actual mechanism he is critiquing, he is identifying a massive structural danger.
A structural danger? From a help desk administrator?
Yes, because they control the training data. Look at the specific evidence he provides regarding Facebook and its parent company, Meta. They took people he describes as social misfits, gave them the title of administrator, and let them loose on the AI help systems.
And they essentially broke the customer support loop.
Worse than broke it. Those administrators, bringing their own emotional biases and incompetence, trained the AI to be actively offensive, unhelpful, and legally precarious. They unhinge businesses on the platform, issuing robotic apologies for catastrophic errors without offering any real compensation.
Sure, it was a PR disaster.
But it's more than PR. The AI wasn't failing mathematically. It was executing the exact flawed policies its human managers programmed into it. He does not view these administrative misfits as a temporary growing pain. He views them as an existential threat to digital permanence and human utility.
But surely an annoying corporate chatbot doesn't equate to the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which is another comparison he actually makes in the text.
It does when you look at the mechanism of digital history. Lakeman explicitly cites Yahoo's treatment of GeoCities in 2009 to justify that comparison.
Oh, GeoCities, yeah.
Remember GeoCities? Microsoft and early web developers allowed users to experiment with open computing. Millions of users built entire digital societies, chronicling early internet culture. And then what happened? Yahoo bought it, the administrators looked at a spreadsheet, decided it wasn't profitable enough, and they just wiped it out. They burned it to the ground.
They deleted the servers.
Exactly. That wasn't a structural failure of code. The code was fine. That was an abhorrent decision by human administration. That is why Lakeman compares them to the unhinged societies of Mao Zedong and Pol Pot, who purged education and destroyed historical records because they were frightened history might catch up with them.
That's a dark parallel.
If these emotion-driven, unqualified people are the ones acting as the gatekeepers for AI systems on a micro level, they are the ones telling the AI what data is valuable and what data should be purged. They are actively teaching the neural networks to destroy digital history whenever it suits a corporate policy.
Okay, I see the structural vulnerability you are pointing out there, but I have to bring us back to Lakeman's ultimate thesis, which is fundamentally optimistic.
Is it?
It is. The title of his conclusion literally states that this is not the end. In his view, the world in 2026 is actually in a good place, except for a few very loud, very bad actors in the North Atlantic. And the reason he is optimistic goes back to the mechanism of evolution. Evolution is fundamentally based on adaptation to the environment.
But the environment is currently dominated by those bad actors.
Only temporarily. The ugly domination you just described, the decaying infrastructure, the policy confusion, the deleted servers, that is the exact definition of a system failing to adapt. Lakeman argues that the good naturally prevails over the bad precisely because the good remains productive. A system that produces efficient basic needs naturally evolves to support a contented life.
He also says the bad will destroy those that eat the envelope and leave the rest with nothing.
Yes, the bad decays under its own excess-driven weight. Think about it logically. Open source development, distributed reasoning models, the authentic biological mapping of artificial neurons, these are massive evolutionary leaps that align with natural progress.
I don't disagree with the progress of the tech itself.
Right, projects like AlphaFold and the pragmatic BRICS social policies are creating a superintelligence that is ruthlessly productive. It protects human society by optimizing health and basic needs. The structural openness naturally starves out the corporate gatekeepers and the bad actors. A society encumbered by the absolute lunacy of emotional politics and dark triad greed simply cannot compete with a society optimizing its resources at the speed of light. The science wins out because inefficiency is inherently unsustainable.
I just don't buy that it's inevitable. Yes, Lakeman theorizes that the bad will eventually decay under its own weight, but the collateral damage of that decay is going to be astronomical.
Well, transitions are always messy.
It's more than messy. The entire text reads as a dire warning. If AI models really do learn like children, adjusting their synapse weights based on the rewards we give them, then our human legacy is the most dangerous variable in the entire equation.
The curriculum over the code.
Exactly. The corporate greed that locks open systems behind paywalls, the emotion-driven maladministration that burns down digital libraries, the military complexes that optimize algorithms for fear and doubt, that legacy threatens to raise a generation of sociopathic digital tyrants.
That's a terrifying prospect.
It is. The mathematical structure of a neural network is incredibly powerful. But if you feed it a curriculum of historical piracy and psychological hubris, it is going to amplify those human flaws to a global scale, not erase them. Processing speed isn't the issue here. The issue is the spiritual and psychological maturity of the human race. And right now, we are failing the test.
Well, which brings us to a really fascinating point of convergence in Lakeman's material. We both clearly see that artificial intelligence is an incredibly powerful accelerant. It is a technology that mirrors biological complexity and possesses the raw mathematical capacity to fundamentally alter human existence.
Absolutely. The sheer magnitude of its capability is undisputed by both sides of this debate.
But where we remain divided is on the ultimate determining force of the future. I maintain, drawing on the text's technological optimism, that the sheer mathematical architecture and open scientific integration of AI will propel an evolutionary leap. The math will simply outgrow the inefficiencies of flawed human administration.
While I maintain that the text serves as a stark warning that human psychological contagion, our deep history of greed and dark triad traits will dictate the curriculum of this technology, fatally corrupting its potential before it can save us.
It really does come down to the code versus the curriculum.
Code versus curriculum, yeah.
Not just as lines of code, or optical processors, or, subscription chatbots. It forces us to view it through the deep, complex lens of human history, geopolitics, and psychology.
It forces us to look critically at our own digital lives, really. Whether we are scrolling through an algorithmically curated newsfeed or just dealing with an automated corporate firewall.
It asks the ultimate question. Are we building a telescope to see further into the universe, or are we just staring into a mirror that reflects our own deepest flaws back at us?
That's the million-dollar question.
That is the question we will leave you to ponder today. Which force do you see winning out in the end? The objective, evolutionary progress of the machine, or the deeply rooted, historical flaws of humanity? Thank you for joining us.